Today is, what's the date today? July 1st, and we're at Cheri Gaulke's house. And Marco Larsen is on camera. Jennifer Palmer, Lacey Palmer is here in the audience from our committee, and I'm Cheryl Revkin doing the interview.
And it's 2018.
And it's 2018, thank you. Okay. So Cheri, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Mm-hmm. When I was a little girl, before I was 4, I lived in California, in Los Angeles. And I always, even though I grew up in the Midwest from age 4 through my second year of college, I always felt that I was a California girl, because this is where I was meant to be. And I went to college in Minneapolis, College of Art and Design, and I have been a feminist my whole life and an artist my whole life. And when I heard about the Women's Building and the Feminist Studio Workshop in Los Angeles, I knew it was the place for me. So in 1975, I moved here to be involved as a student at the Feminist Studio Workshop at the Women's Building. And I needed a place to stay, and the very first place I stayed in Los Angeles was in Silver Lake.
Oh, really?
And I just fell in love with it. It was just like, I could tell it was my home. Of course, it took me a few years to actually get a place in Silver Lake. I ended up living in Pasadena Old Town before it was gentrified, when it was a bunch of artists living in all the spaces there. But eventually we bought our first house in Silver Lake, a tiny little thing on North Occidental in, that would have been 1984, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And what year did you actually come to the Women's Building?
I moved to LA in 1975.
75. And what was the Women's Building like then?
Well, it was a beautiful 3-story red brick building in the middle of an industrial area that was very run down. The building itself was very decrepit. It had been kind of used as a warehouse for years. It had originally been the Standard Oil office building. And we were a group of young women artists from all over the country who came for this educational program. And the first job that we had was to renovate the building. We started in September, and in December, mid-December, we had our grand opening. So we literally had to scrape the ceilings, sand the floors, build the walls. And it was a trying time because none of us had those skills. It was kind of empowering too, though, to actually get the skills. But it was strange because you know we were paying tuition and we felt like we were doing all the work. So a lot of women were very angry about that. But I totally bought into the concept of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, that a woman artist needs a room of her own, and that we live in a culture that's not going to give that to women. We have to build it for ourselves. So to me, it was part of the whole process of claiming this space as a woman artist in the world.
Mm-hmm. As a feminist.
Yeah, and as a feminist. And so in December of 1975, we had our grand opening, and so I was a student in that program of the Feminist Studio Workshop. It was like a postgraduate program, and also volunteered. We were sort of running this giant 3-story building that had a performance space and a cafe and galleries and a print studio and a classroom. So I kind of moved it in the years from being a student to being a worker at the building, a building manager, running the studio program, to eventually being a board member. And although we don't have a space anymore, I'm still on the board. I'm the treasurer of the board. We still have the nonprofit status. And the Women's Building itself, just within the last month, got historical cultural status. So that's very exciting. So we hope that building will be preserved.
Mm-hmm. Will be preserved as the original women's building, but not used as the women's building.
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy who owns it who would like to see someone develop it into condos or something. He'd like to sell it. And so I don't know what the history, the future of it is, but we hope that, I guess a plaque will go up. I don't know. It would be lovely if it could be a cultural center again, because that whole area now has had a whole resurgence, and there are other arts organizations in that area now.
Mm-hmm. And the LA Historical Park is there, right?
Yeah, the state park.
Yeah. Right. And who were some of the people you were working with then that we might know now?
Sure. Well, the founders of the Women's Building were Judy Chicago, Sheila DeBretteville, and Arlene Raven. And when I came 2 years into its existence, Judy had just left, although I worked with her a little bit. Suzanne Lacey was my main mentor, who's really a renowned internationally as a performance artist and as an artist who really innovated social practice art. And that was a lot of the work. I mean, I was doing performance art in those days. And, when I came there, performance art was actually a brand new medium. It wasn't like there were even any schools that taught it yet. They would sort of throw the students who were dealing with things outside of all those genres of drawing, painting, sculpture, those things, they would put us into this sort of new genres or new media category. So it was really exciting for me to move to LA and actually study with someone who did this and was known in her field. And then, I think it's a place where we really innovated stuff that a lot of artists are doing today, like community-based art, social activist art, the use of not just performance and live art, but also the use of graphics as a way to raise awareness about issues and promote social change.
And as far as my understanding goes, there was no place else in the country where you could actually get some kind of degree or certification in feminist art?
That's right, okay. Yeah, because Judy Chicago had started the program at Fresno State, and then they moved to Cal Arts, and then it was the women who were doing the feminist art program at Cal Arts who felt really frustrated being inside of a male-dominated institution to really do what they wanted to do. So they broke apart and created this independent program, Feminist Studio Workshop.
And then it was, the archive actually was recently part of Pacific Standard Time. Why don't you talk about
the archives
that?
of the Women's Building?
Yes.
Yeah, so when we closed our doors in 1991, most of our papers and materials went to the Smithsonian, the Archives of American Art. And those are in Virginia. They're not even Washington, D.C. They're in Virginia. They're very hard to get to. And then in recent years, as more things, we're finding boxes with things we forgot we had, or other women are saying, oh, by the way, I have some stuff. A whole nother batch of materials went to the Getty Research Institute. So then when the Pacific Standard Time exhibitions happened, Otis College of Art and Design their gallery decided to take on the Women's Building as a topic, and Sue Maberry, my wife and partner, who's the director of the library at Otis, she and Meg Linton, who's the gallery director, co-curated this exhibition. They actually went to Washington, D.C., they went to the Smithsonian and borrowed materials from the Smithsonian for the show. They borrowed things from the Getty, and then they had a lot of new artworks were created. So some of it was historical, but new artworks were created by the collectives. And so I was involved with two of the collectives that came out of the Women's Building. There was Mother Art, the Waitresses, and two that I was involved with were Feminist Art Workers and Sisters of Survival. And then the fifth collective was Ariadne, a social art network.
I see. So you were doing performance art at the time then, and you continued as a performance artist, a feminist performance artist, would you say, for quite a while, or how did you express
I was
yourself?
doing video art before I came to the Women's Building, and then when I had gone to Scotland in the summer of 1974 and been exposed to performance art, felt that it was this amazing new art form. And I particularly gravitated to it as a woman. I wrote an essay that's been republished a number of times called Performance Art at the Women's Building, Acting Like Women, Performance Art of the Women's Building, or something like that. But the idea was that as women, we kind of grow up with the skills of performance. We learn persona and characters and makeup and costume and all these things. So I did performance art from like 1975 till 1992, I think was when my last actual big performance was. And then I just kind of got burned out, like making these live works and schlepping props all around the country. And I decided to go back to video as my art form. It was very similar. I always have loved time-based art, so I like artist books, I like performance, I like video, things that kind of unfold in time. And then but I also felt that my work was so impermanent. I just felt like I wasn't really I made objects occasionally, and books are objects, but I thought I want to feel like my work lives in the world. So I was very attracted to the idea of public art. So I think it was 1993 when I got my first public art commission, and I remember being really concerned, could I make that transition? Because, when you do ephemeral work, like who's going to hire you to build a sculpture or weld something or cast something? You don't have that track record. But based on a piece that I had done with working with teens in East LA called the LA River Project. So this was a very multimedia installation, but it had a video river, and it involved research and all these things. I think that it was out of that work, because public art requires sort of a similar process in a way. It requires, and I had a long history of doing work about communities. I mean, that was really my passion, is telling the story of people whose stories are not being told, whether that's women, contemporary or in history, whether that's people of color, children, nature itself. So that sort of characterized all my work, and that worked really well for moving into public art, because public art, at the time I got into it, was making a transition from what used to be called plop art or plunk art, where somebody would make a sculpture and a corporation would buy it and plunk it in their plaza, and it had nothing to do with that community or that history of that place. Public art was starting to go through that transition of being about the place, and I was sort of, I guess, right there at that moment.
Can you tell me about the National Endowment for the Arts and how it related to the Women's Building and then also to you? Did you get some grants from them? Or?
Yes, I got a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, and it was
what year was it?
It was 1983. It was $15,000, which was a big one. And I remember, I probably shouldn't say this on tape, but, well, I'm proud of it. You were allowed to take it in two parts. So I think I took 10 one year and 5 the next, or it was 83, 84. But what Sue, my wife now of 40 plus years, is much more practical and grounded than I am. Somehow the money just got frittered away. Yeah, it's supposed to be there to support your art. And she said, we should really invest that money. We should buy a house. And I was like, can you use art grant money to buy a house? And I tell every single artist I know, if you get grant money and you can buy a house or use it towards endowment, do that. That's going to be the best thing you can do for yourself as an artist, because it gave me that space I needed and that kind of security. And so that's actually how we bought our first house, our little tiny house in Silver Lake that cost $75,000, and I think I put $5,000 or $10,000 of my grant money towards that down payment.
But weren't you ultimately blacklisted by the NEA?
I was investigated by Jesse Helms, asked the General Accounting Office, the GAO, to investigate me, because I guess artists who had gotten money from the NEA, I guess that's why I was investigated. And that was also a time when Karen Finley and John Fleck and
Tom of Finland?
Not Tom of Finland, no. Why am I blanking on his name? Who founded Highways? Tim Miller, and Holly Hughes. They were part of that big NEA thing, and so I was sort of in that sort of community. My name would pop up, and so I was investigated because if you were doing any art that was about sexuality, that they didn't like that. So around that time when I was being investigated, I was doing a performance art piece called Virgin. And it was about trying to get pregnant without a man. So it was basically about trying to get pregnant as a lesbian. So, I was being investigated at that time.
Wasn't there some religious kind of references to your work that the NEA didn't?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of that combination of sexuality and then any kind of critique of Christianity, because my family is 4 generations Lutheran clergy, and I grew up in this very Christian family. But I began questioning it. I began questioning the role of women or the lack of the role of women, and the ways in which female sexuality has been demonized a lot through Christianity, Eve being at fault for the demise of all humankind because of her desire. So one of my performance pieces was called This Is My Body, and one of the most famous images of me is of me as Eve eating the apple. But also in that performance, I was also Christ on the cross, which is...
And naked, right?
And naked, almost, I had a fig leaf for a loincloth. I wasn't completely naked. But so there was the nudity, there was a critique of Christianity, there was a sexuality. Then there was the queerness coming into it. So all those things were very being challenged and critiqued. It's funny, nothing ever came up about what I used my money for, putting a down payment on a house. That's, even though I was very nervous about that at the time, I don't think there was ever any problem with that.
Yeah. So when the women's building closed,
Yeah.
And you didn't have any more grant money, how did you support yourself, even Sue, support yourself?
Well, I mean, I never supported myself on grant money. I mean, I think that's rare, any artist that does. I mean, the grant money always comes in as a sort of like lovely little amount to help you create a project or something. But I've always been either an arts administrator, so I was the manager at the Women's Building, and then I became a teacher. So I've and I got different grants over the years. When I was at the Women's Building, I got a California Arts Council grant for 3 years where I was an artist in residence, and I did a thing called the Postcard Project celebrating our heroines. And over a 3-year period, I facilitated 300 people to make limited edition postcards and design and print them on the letterpress about a woman important to them, whether it was personal or historical. So I got that CAC grant. And then I got a COLA grant, a City of LA grant in 2005, I believe. That funded me to do 3 new artist books. So, but I've always had to have a day job. Teaching has been the main thing. And when I was in the 80s, I'd been teaching at colleges and universities. And then in the 80s, I kind of fell into the possibility of teaching at high school, which I was like, I think Sue heard that there was this opening at Crossroads, and I went and applied there, and I got the job. And it was challenging. It was challenging because I'd never really been trained as a teacher. And when you're teaching college, they're basically adults. But when you're teaching teenagers, it's something else. They look like adults, but they're not. So I feel like I had a steep learning curve, but a few years in, and the other thing that was strange about it was that I'd been all these years in the feminist movement, and I'd done all this work for women to be liberated and not acting like ditzy and, weird around men and stuff. And then I went back to a high school setting, and the girls were acting. I was like, why are you acting like that? Like, we fought for years for you to not have to act like this. And that was very disheartening to me. But then I heard about a job at Westlake School for Girls. And I was never a big proponent of single-sex education, but I went over there, I applied, and I got that job, and I was so impressed. I thought suddenly I saw in a setting away from boys, teenage girls could be powerful when they didn't have to worry about what they looked like, all those being judged in all those ways. So that now I'm just finished my 30th year with that school, because essentially Westlake School for Girls merged with Harvard School for Boys, and it's Harvard Westlake. So
now it's co-ed.
It's a co-ed school. So 3 years into my working for them, it became co-ed, and I love it. I love working with teenagers, and like I said, it's just been a little bit of a steep learning curve, but I actually think I am a very good teacher of teenagers now.
Mm-hmm. And the school is supportive of you as a lesbian?
Very
artist?
Supportive.
And a feminist?
In the 90s, in the early 90s, none of the teachers were out. It was a very closeted place. And there were a lot of gay teachers, and we sort of knew who each other were, but nobody was out. And I started to feel like I was aware that some of my kids were gay, and I thought, who is a role model for those kids? Who can they talk to? I consulted a lawyer and said, do you think I should come out? Would that be an okay thing to do? And she said, absolutely not. This is a lesbian lawyer. She says, you're going to lose your job. You've got an at-will contract. I would advise you against it. And I just decided I'm going to do it. I don't care. I'm going to do it. And I'm so glad I did. And so over the years, so I started the Project 10 at our school, the Straight Gay Alliance, we called it. Now it's the Sexuality and Gender Alliance. Things have changed. So I've been super out all over the years, and it's gone from me having to sort of on coming out day to formally say, class, I have an announcement. I'm a lesbian, and they'd all be kind of like freaked out and stuff. But now it's sort of and then there was a few years there where I would almost say it as a joke. I said, it's natural coming out. So I would tell them, they're like, yeah, we know. No, I don't even bother because it's just so like normal and part of life.
And the school is religiously based, right? And they
not really. I think Harvard had an Episcopal base, but there's no religious affiliation anymore.
But in general, they never hassled you. They never threatened you, and
not at all.
And you've been elevated to a head of the department there.
Right. I've been head of the department for many years. Yeah,
that's great.
I feel very supported in my job.
And then while you were there, what about your family? You got pregnant.
Yeah, well, let's see. Sue Maberry and I got together in 1979, and then I forget what year Sue started saying we should have a kid, and I was like, no, I'm an artist, I can't have a kid, and then we tried, and we made a deal. I would have, I thought, since I'd done all this artwork about the body, I thought it'd be really cool to be pregnant, so I wanted to be the one to have the baby. And I said, I'll just hand it to you. I'll give birth, and I'll hand it to you, and you'll raise it. And I'll go back to my art. And that was our deal. And then, different things happened. Sue went back to school. We took a break. Came back to it. We changed sperm donors. I was 39, so starting to have some infertility issues. We went to a fertility doctor, and then I got pregnant with twins.
Right.
And I cried. I found out early in the morning. I cried all the way to work because I was like, my beautiful plan of handing this child off is not going to work when there are two of them. But so Xochi and Marka were born in
two girls
in 1994, right?
Yes.
You're their godmother,
right.
So goddess mother. I always can't remember if it's 92 or 94. 94. And they're amazing. I love them. They're incredible. I can't imagine life without them. Now, it's just like I have these two amazing 24-year-old women in my life who, take care of me as much as I take care of them. And we're just a really happy Silver Lake family.
Right. So living in Silver Lake kind of fit in with being a lesbian family, and that was comfortable for you. And Xochi actually has gotten her master's in fine arts, right? And is an artist. So
I remember a Silver Lake memory when they were little, and I don't remember how old they were, maybe 8, but maybe younger. And I remember there was going to be a gay pride, I think it was a pro-gay families little demonstration march in Silver Lake on Sunset. And so we, got cardboard, and we had each girl made her own sign, and one of them made love makes a family, and the other one did love is love. And and we went to this march, and when we got there, everybody had all these pre-printed signs that were really professional, and Xochi and Marka's signs were just so adorable because they were done by little kids, and they were colorful, and the letters were all different sizes. And everybody just thought they were so cute that they said, here, you go in the front. So they actually went in the front of the march and kind of led it. And there was somebody from the newspaper was there, took their picture and wrote about them and how cute they were. And so it was really a great moment of pride.
And they were students at Harvard Westlake too, which is nice for you.
Yes, starting in the 7th grade,
Great. So we're in Silver Lake now, and you've been teaching for a while, and you continue to do public art projects.
Right.
And there was one for Silver Lake, right?
Yes.
The Medallions.
Yes, I was artists in the community could compete to make a design for the Medallions, and I won that competition.
Do you want to explain what a medallion is?
Yeah, the Medallions are those metal street signs that are on lightposts that kind of identify a neighborhood or a community, and they've become more popular over the years.
And what was your concept behind the medallion?
My concept was I wanted it to be colorful because it is such a colorful community in terms of the diversity, whether that's ethnic diversity, class diversity, even this sort of kind of visual, there are hills and there are flats, and there's just lots of different things in this community. So my design is basically a landscape. There's this sort of hills at the bottom. There's some spaces some shapes that looks abstract, but it is kind of a landscape. There's hills, there's the water of the reservoir, there's the sky, and then there are these sort of just balls, these just brightly colored balls that are kind of floating through. And then, well, actually, you know what? I'm confusing. Well, or is it similar? It's kind of similar in a way, the art cans, because what I was about to say is really what happened on the art can, because the art can was a mosaic sort of iteration of a similar design. And each side of the can, I was thinking about those balls and how they could have a little bit of representation. So the one that was facing towards Edendale Grill, it was a green ball with a red ball, so it looked like a martini olive, because I like to get a cocktail there every once in a while. So there'd be these little, like, personal.
It was the Silver Lake Martini, wasn't it?
I guess,
your
yeah.
name for it, right? But that really came after the Medallions.
That's right, that came after it. Yeah, I was.
And what I remember is you said you didn't want to use any primary colors because we're Silver Lake, right? And and then the slogan for the neighborhood council was Silver Lake celebrates its traditions of. What is it? Diversity, innovation, and harmony.
Harmony, right.
Right. And we had researched what the three dominant languages are in Silver Lake, which is English, Spanish, and Tagalog.
Right. And that was a lot.
Maybe I'm telling you.
No, thank you. You're bringing it all back.
The circle represented our unity, and you took each of those words in the three different languages within a circle. So there were 3 circles with those 3 words.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
You remember this better than I do.
Right. Which I thought, and that, it was the concept that everybody voted for.
Good.
They really liked that. Right.
Yeah. That's so good. I'd forgotten about the colors, though, because I love the tertiary and the, good.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. So there are 32 of those medallions all around Silver Lake. Right. And I think people don't really know that you made them.
No, they probably don't.
All right. And then afterwards, there was the project for the the trash cans around Silver Lake that people wanted to look really pretty. And so you designed just one of those. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, the years I did public art, so I did public art for 15 years, and I designed 10 different public art pieces around the city. And every project I would try to use a different material. So I was really excited to do that art cans because it was mosaic, and I love mosaics, and I always wanted to do a mosaic. Of course, I kind of cured myself of my wish to do it again. It was really amazing, just amazing, a lot of work just for those 4 sides. Right. But it was fun. All my neighbors came and helped.
I helped.
Yeah.
And then wasn't there an accident or something, and a car ran into your can, I think?
I know that
yours
one
was in front of the old recycler building.
I know one of the things fell off.
One of the panels.
Yeah, and somebody stole it, I think, and it was never replaced, unfortunately.
Okay. So then there's another public art project near here, the metro station.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
That was actually the very first public art commission I got. It was in 1993.
Oh, it was the first one?
And I was pregnant with Xochi and Marka, and I remember at the time I didn't want them to know I was pregnant because the due date for designing the work was May, and my due date was May, and I thought if they know I'm pregnant, they're going to say, oh, she won't be able to pull it off, she won't be able to do it, so we won't give it. So anyway, I kind of concealed that, and it was very interesting. I talked to the arts administrators later, and they said, oh, that wouldn't have been a problem. Well, the irony is actually we dedicated that station 10 years later in 2003, and Xochi and Marka were at the dedication. They were 10 years old. It's just like mind-blowing because it took so long to make that. And what was great about it, though, is I was a 10-year more mature artist, and I could kind of take my original design. So that project, it was originally called Avenue 26. It's now called Lincoln Heights Cypress Park Station. And it's right where the LA River and the Arroyo Seco intersect. And, you know, I grew up in Missouri where rivers were very important, and we would spend a lot of time like going on float trips down rivers, and rivers just had this very spiritual meaning to me. The dog can we hear the dog? We don't know. And there was something just so sad about these rivers in Los Angeles that have been, in these concrete corsets, as Lewis McAdams says. So what I wanted to do with my metro station is to kind of bring you back to what that place used to be. So I was able to not only design art for the station, but to design the landscaping. So I worked with a landscape architect. All the landscaping, our sycamore trees are all native plants. We created the illusion of a dry, like arroyo. I got to go to a place somewhere and literally pick out every stone, every boulder in that station I picked out. I got an orange spray can and got to put an X on. I want this one and I want that one. It was so fun. And so the basic components of it is a triptych story fence and then a life-size bronze sculpture of a Native American Atongva woman who is gathering water from the river. And she is based on a historic photo from the DWP archives of an actual woman. And she was, I hired my friend Ruth Ann Anderson to actually sculpt her because I'm not a sculptor. And she actually sort of based her on I posed for it, which was fun. And her skirt is water. And her shawl is waves, and she's gathering this water from the river.
It's a bronze.
It's a bronze life size, so you can literally stand next to her, and she's a historic figure. Across the tracks is this hammered copper story fence triptych, and the left fence has a quote from Vera Rocha, who was the chiefess of the Gabrielino Tongva people, and she and her husband actually broke ground on the gold line. And I went to they did a whole smudging ceremony, and I called her up and I said, Vera,
at the station itself, they did it
they
unveiled it.
At the beginning of the line, before they broke ground to even do any of the construction,
really?
the way back over by Chinatown kind of area. And I called her up and I said, Vera, I'm doing my station all about the water, and I really want to include what the water means to your people. And she said, the river is the mother. Wait, no, how does it go? Water is our mother, and the river are her veins. Is her veins? I can't remember if it's is or are, but. And I said, oh my, and that's just what came out of her mouth. I said, that's so beautiful, those are my words. So the left fence says that, so it has the Vera Rocha's words. The center fence, the largest one, is a Gabrielino story that was recorded about the coyote challenging the river to a race. And to me, it's a story of nature and culture, and the way in which culture, we think we're so smart and we can outsmart nature. And the river's like, great, you're on. And the coyote runs and runs and runs and runs and runs and just finally collapses in exhaustion, and the river keeps going. And so it was this great parable to me that was told by the people. And so that story is told on that fence with a landscape that's based on the actual landscape and has a river that goes through it, and a coyote made out of...
Wasn't it cut out?
It cut out and made out of Lexan, which is this very high-grade material. The windows on the space shuttle are made out of Lexan, and it's golden and it kind of glows. It's lit from behind at night. And then the right fence represents kind of the contemporary iteration of the river, and it's Lewis McAdam, who is a poet and founder of Friends of the LA River. He has it's some lines from a poem of his about how the river is captured in this concrete corset, but if you tickle her with your deeds, you can hear her laugh. And to me, the deeds that we tickle the river with is our activism to bring the river back into our lives, because we feel very disconnected from this concrete-clad river, but in fact, it is, our veins, and it is something that, and it, from when I first did the LA River project with the teens in East LA, that video installation back in, I think that was that 79 or 89? Boy, all these years. It must have been 89. It was in 89. There was nothing about the river. It was hardly any activism. No, nothing. Like nowadays, things have changed so much. There's so much consciousness. I mean, people back then thought it was a sewage ditch. They didn't even get that it was a river. So I've just seen so much change. Anyway, but it was. I'm very proud of that station.
Yeah, and Mayor Garcetti wants to revitalize the river and take a lot of the concrete out, which will be great, right?
Yeah.
So when they unveiled the station, wasn't there a member of the tribe, the elder from the tribe who came with his
Yes.
son?
So Vera Rocha had since died. So when we were dedicating, I just felt it was really important to have that representation of someone from the Tongva Nation. And I contacted the person, and he and his son, and he's like, "Oh, I'm really busy, and I can't." And I could tell he just wasn't going to come. And then I told him the story about calling Vera and how important it was to me, and how they were going to unveil it, and there was going to be this Tongva woman and her words, and he was just like, "I'll be there."
Right.
And he did all.
He brought a smudge
He
stick.
smudged, and it was really powerful. Yeah.
And what I remember is he said that a lot of people still lived in that area then. He lived close by, I think. Now it's very gentrified, and there are all kinds of condos there and all. But back then, there were people who were kind of working class people who from the tribe who still lived there, which is great. Yeah.
That's great.
And then there was another project that you did, the Filipino Veterans.
Right. Yeah, and that was a project when Eric Garcetti was our city council
What
person.
street is that on?
It's on Lake Street in Historic Filipino town, and I believe I was asked to do that commission. I don't remember going through a competition.
There was some talk about having a Filipino artist.
Yeah,
I think there was.
possibly. And I had also I had competed to do the Medallions for Historic Filipino town and didn't get that commission, which is fine. I felt like the person who got it did a better job. But yeah, I think the art consultant Leslie Elwood, who I worked with on my Metro Rail station and on my Lakewood project, she was, I believe, hired to manage the this Filipino Veterans Memorial, and I think that's how I got involved. I can't quite remember, but that was an amazing process. And
why did Eric want that done? I mean, he had his grandfather, right?
That's right.
Fought
and Eric,
in the war and in the Philippines, right?
Yeah, his grandfather had fought in the Philippines, and of course the Filipino veterans were part of his constituency, but he felt very passionate that their story needed to be told, because basically they were promised to be U.S. veterans if they fought
with the benefits.
With the benefits. And what happened after the war is they didn't get any of those benefits, and they had been fighting for 45 years to be recognized as U.S. veterans.
And
so,
a lot of them were dying, and they were
exactly,
getting old. And
yeah,
dying.
they were in their 80s, late 80s. And I mean, to me, it was so ironic that I was designing a veterans memorial, because I've been so against war for my whole life. And when I was a kid, my dad was a Civil War buff, and he'd drag us around to all these different battlefields, and it was something I really didn't like. And then But then that part of me that my art has always been about, of wanting to tell stories that are not told, when I met these veterans, and I just felt like people have to know their story. So I became very interested in designing a memorial that would not just, be a pure abstraction, it has abstract elements, but that would just say these guys are great, but more, I really wanted to tell their story. So, and it was kind of, I think it's maybe the Christian in me, that sort of this idea of these tablets that record so there are these black monoliths that are sort of fractured and a bit like a landscape, but that tell the whole history of the relationship of the Philippines to the United States, and just kind of a military history of that,
and the Death March, right?
and the Bataan Death March, and then just highlighting different people. There was somebody who'd gotten one of those Valor medals of
Medal of Valor.
Medal of Valor,
and this was placed in front of the community center where a lot of the veterans would gather every
That's
day,
right? Yeah.
So they would see it. And then didn't you go to Washington to research some of the stories, and you came up with this woman who was they thought was dead, and she was pregnant and put on a truck, and she ended up surviving, and that there's a photo of her scanned onto the mom.
You have a much better memory than I do.
Yeah.
The good thing is that I did a book.
Yes, you did a book.
And the book has all the information that will hold that memory. But yeah.
You were able to scan photos.
Yes.
That were historical photos that
Yes.
were taken and that were in an archive in Washington onto the monolith.
That's right. Yeah, I actually, the photographs I actually licensed and acquired from the American Archives of America, not Archives of America, but basically the government archives, yes. So they were all photographs. There's a text that I worked very hard on writing and making sure it was accurate, and I hired historical consultants and who could verify that I was telling the story accurately. And so the different panels tell different periods of time, and then the last panel is the story of their struggle, the more contemporary struggle of them trying to get their rights. And then the last line is something, and to this day they have not received their benefits. And I know that has changed, I believe, since
a lot of people had died, but they did
Yeah.
ultimately get that.
Yeah.
And then the word valor was written in English and also in Tagalog.
Yes, so one side has valor as a sort of big graphic, and then the other side has this history. And then I also did benches, black granite benches, because I wanted it to be as part of the memorial. Instead of just being, these verticals, I wanted there to be a place where the veterans could come, because they were elderly, sit and just look at it and read it and enjoy it. Of course, that was a challenge with the skateboarders, because there's a lot of skateboarders in that park.
And there aren't many Filipino people living there anymore, too, right? Yeah. But you did produce a book about their struggles, which I had in my office. I want to tell you, I would give it to my Filipino patients to read, because a lot of people really didn't know that history, right?
Yeah, it was a great honor to do that work.
So do you want to talk about some projects that you're doing now, maybe not so related to Silver Lake, but Righteous Conversations, or your work with teenagers?
Sure, yeah, and I wanted to just mention, too, my bottle fence in front of my house.
We just shot it.
Yeah, because you shot it. That was sort of a prototype I wanted to do, hoping that people would hire me to do it at their houses. No one has, but the idea of using recycled material and sort of stringing wine bottles like beads. But that was inspired by Grandma Prisbury, Tressa Prisbury, who did Bottle Village and Simi Valley. It was sort of, I became aware of her in the 70s when I came. Well, actually, I became aware of her before I even moved to LA. She was part of a folk art show at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. And at the time, we all have heard of the Watts Towers, and there's all these kind of folk art things around the country, but there's so few that have been done by a woman. And I remember going, that's so cool. And then when I came out here, I was able to visit her, and I curated a show of her work. She made 13 structures out of bottles. That were really amazing. So that's a tribute to Grandma Prisbury, my bottle fence. But
there's so the Righteous Conversation project, and also Gloria, this film that you've done. You're still making films.
Yeah.
You've done a couple of films.
Nowadays I'm mostly working in film, and I just finished a documentary called Gloria's Call, which is about Gloria Ornstein, who is a retired scholar and a wonderful character.
At USC?
She was a professor for many years at USC, and the documentary is her telling stories about this starting in the 70s, when she kind of got whooshed into this adventure of meeting all these women surrealist artists in Paris. Leonora Carrington, Leonora Fini, all these different artists. And Gloria Ornstein ended up becoming a scholar and writing some very groundbreaking work about women surrealist artists, because at the time it was mostly the men were being featured and the women were just sort of like adornment, but they were doing this amazing work. So she kind of did a feminist analysis. But the documentary is her telling these very colorful stories and then animating the stories. So it's a very kind of whimsical piece. I'm in the early stages of working on a feature-length documentary about the Women's Building. I'm finally really excited and ready to take that big project on.
So a documentary about
the Women's Building, and basically about we'll probably showcase specific women whose lives were changed by the Women's Building. I work in a lot of different styles of, a little bit of experimental video, a little bit narrative. There's another narrative film I've been wanting to make, is written but will be produced hopefully soon, that's about gentrification and about Silver Lake.
Oh, really?
And it takes place at Luis Lopez's gas station. It's just sort
around
of the location. Yeah.
The automotive repair.
But it's a fictional Silver Lake story. It's about hipster developers that come in and want to tear down the gas station. And what else? I've just completed 30 years of teaching high school students and creating a lot of fun programs for them, like the Righteous Conversations Project, which is bringing Holocaust survivors and teens together. So we've been doing that for 8 years, and we do media projects, documentaries, and public service announcements.
Also, your the travel.
And then the other program I do is Digital Storytelling Adventures, where I take kids to foreign countries to make documentaries, and they're always countries recovering from conflict. So we've been to Rwanda, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Cuba, Guatemala, U.S.-Mexico border. So tomorrow I start the new class with them, and we're going to Guatemala on Thursday. To do documentaries, and so I'm looking at, in the next year, retiring from teaching and being able to do my own work full time. And I'm I will miss my teens, but I'm excited about living in Silver Lake and making art.
Yeah, great.
All day long.
Okay, all right, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot.